Hello and a very warm welcome to this edition of Insight. In Insight today, we are going to track one important development of the day, that is the Brexit vote. Well, a referendum is being held in the UK today to decide whether Britain should leave or remain in the European Union, while the whole world will be keenly watching the outcome of the UK referendum, or the popularly called Brexit vote. It's worth contemplating what an exit might hold in store, both for the UK as a trading nation and more particularly for the other countries in the European Union. If the answer is remain, Britain will continue to integrate with the EU's 27 other countries. Prime Minister David Cameron, along with 16 members of his cabinet, want Britain to stay in the European Union. US President Barack Obama also wants Britain to remain in the European Union, as do other EU nations, France and Germany. In a crucial referendum today, British voters will be deciding whether their country should remain a member of the European Union. With this, months of fierce debate over the popularly known Brexit comes to an end. It is seen as a once-in-a-lifetime decision for Britain. The referendum will have its impact on the global financial markets if the British choose to opt out of the European Union. Brexit could rattle investors in Europe, Asia and the US. The Washington Post recently reported that leaving the European Union could jeopardize the access British companies have to the 28 companies that comprise the European Union. Although the Leave campaign has focused on emotional arguments about immigration and British sovereignty, the uncertainty associated with leaving the EU has had an influence on the people. Since no country has ever done it before, so no one can predict the exact result. Amidst a neck-and-neck situation, the referendum today will settle a question that's been rumbling close to the surface of British politics for a generation. Should the country remain within the European Union or leave the organization and go it alone? Bureau Report. So leaving the EU would be a big step, arguably far more important than who wins a general election, as has been put, but would it certainly set the nation free or condemn it to economic slowdown is one big question to really ask for. And to talk more on this, I'm joined by Mr. Devendra Pant, who's Chief Economist with India Ratings, and Mr. Sanjay Jha, who's South Asia Bureau Chief with ITV News. Welcome to the program. Let me start the analysis with you, Mr. Jha. Well, what exactly do you think is going to be decisively the mandate? This indeed is a very crucial exercise which the UK has undertaken, and of course the results will be out by tomorrow. But as I said, there's a lot in this speculation, there's a lot to contemplate. What if Britain just chooses to move out of the EU? What exactly is the general mood? There seems to be very mixed signals coming from there.
Yes, certainly. You know, the country after a very long time has become very polarized. You know, there is intra-party factions within the ruling Tory, the Labour Party, you know, so there's no one indication that even in one party, let's say Prime Minister Cameron's Tory party, you know, he's trying to stay in and then going and campaigning for that. His own close, you know, the former mayor of London, Boris Johnson, is like campaigning leave, you know. So within the party also there is a lot of polarization. But what has happened after the murder of a member of parliament who was, you know, campaigning for staying in the EU, I think the mood is slightly changed. So there is two primarily issue here. You know, those who wants to Britain to remain in the EU, they are concerned in that economic stability. You know, that how with our
Britons can manage without it.
Without it, you know. So as you said, the President Obama has said that it's easier to deal with you when you are a part of the bigger bloc. When you become your own, then you'll be much lower in the trading priority for Americans. So similarly, the Prime Minister Cameron has been talking about it, going around the entire country and campaigning for staying in the EU. He also has support of the opposition. The Labour is also supporting him in that.
And interestingly, the European Union, just for the benefit of our viewers, is an economic political partnership involving about 28 European countries. It began after the World War II to foster economic cooperation, with the idea that countries which trade together are more likely to avoid going to war with each other. It has since grown to become a single market, allowing goods and people to move around, basically as if member states were one country. It has its own currency, the euro, which Britain has not accepted, which is otherwise used by 19 other member countries. It has its own parliament, and it also now sets rules in a wide range of areas, including that on environment, transport, consumer rights, and even things like mobile phone charges? Well, certainly. But one of the things which has been held by at least those people who had been campaigning hard for the Leave campaign, they had said that it's about Britain's sovereignty. It's also about immigration. Let's first talk about the sovereignty aspect. How do you look at that argument? Has it really gone down deep and very well among the people, Mr. Pant?
Well, I think the sovereignty aspect is one of the loose link, because at the end of the day, they are not part of big European Union. They have their own currency.
That's true.
They have their own central bank.
Yeah.
Whereas rest of the European Union, there will be European Central Bank, ECB, will have a monetary policy, and the rest of the economy, all the economies will follow that. In the case of Britain or England, it's the Bank of England who is the monetary authority. They have their own currency. So sovereignty is not a major issue. I believe what is the major issue is the employment situation. Since it's a free flow of human capital, so the people in those countries where the unemployment is high, wages are low, they are going and they are coming to England. And you will find of late there are large number of people from various countries in the European Union. Okay. They are finding employment in the Europe.
Right.
Now what happens is, it's same as like when we say the Indians or Southeast Asian people, they are migrating to Canada, US or to England or to European Union. They get the manufacturer in these economies gets a cheaper source of employment.
Right.
And that gives them an edge over the competitors, over the other manufacturers, those are using a higher cost. See how the manufacturing base started with China, shifted to Taiwan, then to
right.
to some part of it came to India, some in the Bangladesh, moving to the African nations. It is precisely because in today's time, when there is a cutthroat competition, margins have to be protected, and the one way of protecting margins is go to a place where the labor costs are cheaper. So to me, that appears to be the main reason
driver
why, or the driver of leave EU or the Brexit.
But you know what, one interesting thing is the fact that the EU was formed on certain principles. Now, what about that? What really happens to it? It was indeed a very unique experiment also for all these countries to come together and share this kind of harmony. One would call it a bonhomie. You know, the whole union is seen as a country. Now, what happens to that concept if Britain moves out?
Well, you know, as Dr. Pant rightly said, Britain has not really fully integrated into EU right from
That's true. From the beginning itself.
From the beginning itself, you know, they never, you know, scrapped their currency. They remained pound sterling country.
Which was one of the key links.
Which was one of the, you know, the rest of the, you know, European countries, they have one currency.
Right.
And they call it, you know, one currency nations. Even in terms of visa, you know, I mean, all European countries adopted Schengen. You know, Britain is the country which never went for a Schengen visa. So you have to apply a separate British visa despite being part of the EU. So if you look at the relationship, you know, and what has bolstered the, you know, the Leave campaign is the sovereignty. You know, it might be loosened, but on many occasions, what happened, the European, you know, the court gave a judgment on human rights, which was sort of overriding on the British law. You know, I mean, so there's a law existing in the Britain, and European Union will go against that. So that kind of, you know, fueled that why do we need to listen to the.
And they had enough time to think about it. This debate has been going on for a very long time.
Exactly. I mean, you know, last time when the general election took place, the Prime Minister Cameron promised that, you know, we will have, you know, it was before the, you know, the Scotland referendum. So
That's
this is
true.
like a second biggest referendum. But the bitterness, you know, the polarization which has been seen in this, you know, referendum has not happened in a recent time in British politics.
Okay, but there are economic concerns. You know, Dr. Pant, the fact is that from our perspective, we always assess a nation or its choices vis-a-vis our concerns, and we probably are not able to look deep into the problems that the society and that particular nation must be encountering on different fronts. The fact that economically, is that also going to hit Britain the most? And how do you think that the people are taking that argument? Because it seems, you know, when there is a free movement of goods and services among these nations, there's no taxes, of course, things are much simpler. It's going to be difficult now, if at all Britain opts to move out.
Look, the impact, as if you look all economists across the globe, whether we talk about the Christine Lagarde IMF head, everybody has advised or given their view that Britain should stay with the EU. The single most region, or one of the major region, is, if you look, your trade or Britain's trade with the Europe. It's 45% of its trade is with the fellow European countries. Now, what happens is that it is easy because there are free movement of goods from one country to the another country. Though Britain is not part of EU, so there will be some sort of border check, but not when it is totally out of it. So, what is going to happen? You may see the cross-border trade getting affected.
Okay.
All right. How the economy is going to behave, because most of the people are of the opinion, those who are deep into the economic fundamental and economics of Europe, the assessment is chances are that Britain will slump into a deep recession. Now, if that happens, that will be disaster for the British economy. Already the economy is not doing very good. They are somehow doing doing better, but not very good. So, if it goes into a deep or long recession, then there will be other social issues which will start creeping in Britain.
And you see, one of the moments that probably you know, emboldened the view of Britain staying away from the EU was perhaps the 2008 global recession, because that was the time, as one would see and one would watch it very often reported, that the Britain usually believed that the idea of EU could have been a good idea, sovereignty of course being one of the key concerns, but the euro is a disaster. The fact that they did not accept it also cushioned them against the problems in the 2008. So, do you think that really could have emboldened the thought of staying away from EU or staying out of EU?
Yeah, certainly. You see, what happened 2007, and before that, some East European countries became part of the EU, and because of the free human movement. If you go to London today, you know, most of the hotel jobs, you know, most of the restaurant jobs, you'll find, you know, people working from Romania, from Poland, you know, and these were the jobs which was traditionally done by Britishers, you know. So, there is unemployment, obviously, that is giving them, look, you know, and the economy is not doing well. So, the job is not expanding, and whatever is coming, that is going to the people from, you know, so immigration is the biggest, you know, the weapon, the Leave campaign is.
And there were very emotional posters also which were used during the campaign.
Yes.
On the immigration issue.
Exactly. So, you know, so what has happened in recent time, you see there's a flux of immigrants coming from, you know, the Middle East, from Syria and other parts of the world. But obviously, they are not at the moment. All of them have gone to the UK.
That's right.
But
equal sharing.
Equal sharing of that, you know.
Responsibility of holding those immigrants.
Exactly.
That
so,
is shared by these countries.
you know, and also you saw the way the European Union handled the financial crisis in Portugal or the Greece, you know.
That's right.
So, the common Britons were not really impressed with that, you know, and they think that Germany is leading, you know, they're, you know, the EU is controlled by Germany. So, why should we subsidize for the failings of a certain country, you know. So, those are the things which is really, you know, propelling the Leave campaign supporters.
So, there are a lot of emotional aspects related to the Leave campaign. Of course, it's not just about economy, but it has all these concerns as to why accept supremacy of one nation, why go along on terms which, you know, Britain as a country would not really like to accept, and have a different policy, even if when it comes to handling immigrants. Let's say if it stays away from the EU, it can really work on that.
Yeah, I mean, you see now, since the EU takes a decision about, you know, settling down the immigrants, you know, then Britain as a member have to adopt to that. Germany has already taken the lead. And also, I would like to take you back to the historically, you see, the Britain always had its own independent status, you know.
Yeah.
European countries, Germany and others, you know, maybe a trading big bloc, you know, but Britain, from the colonization, you know, to the other aspects, you know, they always maintain their separate status, you know. So they feel that why should we listen to France or why should we listen to Germany, you know, when it comes to the economic plan for the some embattled economies or, you know, human rights issues. We have our own law.
Are there other concerns also attached to it? Could there be security and other concerns as well on the sidelines of this thought?
Yeah, security is obviously a big. Britain is considered to be one of the safe country, you know, and they have their own social, you know, programs like NHS. So if they feel that if there is a huge amount of people coming into the country, we will not
Related
be able
the
to,
immigration
yeah,
level.
social benefits, you know, will not be maintained the same. There is already a problem in terms of over, you know, burdening of the social services sector. So
You know, one important thing, Dr. Pant, is that when you're looking at the economic ties of Britain with other countries, whether it's bilateral in nature and how countries have been trading with the EU as a whole, how do you look at that? Would there be any visible impact of any decision going whichever way? I mean, let's just focus about the leave part because that's what changes the situation. How is that going to really impact that?
Look, if Britain leaves EU, then the first casualty will be the exchange rate.
Okay.
Now, which way it will move, very difficult to predict. But there are chances that the pound sterling rises or gets strengthened, then it will immediately have an impact on its trade. Now, your exports will start impacting, and that too when Britain has 45% of its exports to the rest of the Europe.
Right.
That will be the first casualty for
First
Britain.
casualty, as you said,
Britain.
okay.
What it is doing, if you look at last 1 week, the volatility in the global financial markets are increasing. And it's not only the issue of what is going to happen to Britain, but any unusually large fluctuation, whether it's the strengthening of the pound sterling or the weakening of the pound sterling, that is going to give the global financial world a big jolt. And as such, the global financial system is not very stable as on today.
Especially US and Asia and the others, right?
Yes, because you know what is going to happen is the one benchmark currency value which has an impact across the globe is the US dollar index. And the weights in the US dollar index is based on the trade weighted of US trade, bilateral trade with the rest of the countries.
Okay.
Now, if say the pound sterling gets strengthened against euro, all right, so euro will weaken. Euro will weaken, immediately it will be reflective on the US dollar index, which will get strengthened. Second step, pound sterling gets weakened against the US dollar, US dollar will again strengthen. And since Indian rupee is also a in that basket of US dollar index, without having anything in India or in US, which will make on the bilateral basis both economies either better or weaker, Indian rupee will start weakening.
Okay.
And across the board, all emerging markets currency will start weakening.
So, is that one of the concerns why
That
the
is-
Prime Minister of that country too wants
Yes,
Britain
that
to
is
stay in the EU?
see, there are two things. A, when we get into something like, oh, it's a sovereignty issue, we are British, why should we look at or why should we go by what EU President or EU Parliament is saying?
True.
But look, with the EU, Britain with the part of EU has the best advantage. They have their own monetary policy, they have their own fiscal policy, they have own economic policy. They can frame rules according to the requirement of their economy.
So, a part of it, I mean, the sovereignty part, they have at least,
They
it has
have.
remained
Oh,
intact.
they have.
It
They
has
have
they have a
with them.
special status
They
within
have a
the
special
EU.
status.
Yeah,
of course.
that's what I said in the beginning. So, to me, sovereignty is not the major issue, but the major issue is unemployment. Major issue is how this immigration will be tackled.
Yeah.
And as Mr. Jha said, because the more immigration will increasing, you have to provide the social security. So, there is the less which is available to the native British.
And is there also going to be extra strain on UK's GDP particularly, because the spending will go up to some extent if you're not able to generate enough revenue? Of course, there will be some sort of direct impact on the country's growth.
There will be. See, look at situation. Suppose Britain goes out of the EU, and all the migrants who are there as on today, what is going to happen to them? Whether they will, this is the cutoff. As on today, all the immigrants, those who are in the Britain, will remain there. No new immigration.
Okay.
Or they will be deported back to their respective countries. If you stop further migration, then your labor market conditions will not improve significantly, and it will, because the new labor will not come freely. So, this will push wage cost.
Okay.
Even if those are sent back to their respective countries, and only the Britishers or those who were resident or of Britain, they are in the job market because these people goes. Even in that case, the labor wage cost is going to push up. The moment wage cost goes up in the economy, it always have the negative impact, because then as a manufacturer in the global economy, global market, you will lose your competitive advantage which you had till now because of low wage cost.
Fine.
So, you may be costlier than the same producer who is producing in France or Germany.
Right.
So, all the multinationals, those who have those who are manufacturing in Europe, in Britain as well as in France, this manufacturer, in order to remain competitive in the global market, will start moving away or stop producing or reduce their production in the Britain, but increase their production in the rest of the Europe.
In the rest of the countries, okay.
And that will have a straight away impact on the British economy.
Fine. So, those concerns are very, very clear. But let's look at some other aspects too. It is believed that in the European Union too, it is just some of these nations which are actually driving the union forward. The others are really seen as some sort of a strain. Is that also one of the weaknesses of the EU, which you think is indeed a weakness? Or is that just a part of some international cooperation where you have to take everyone along?
I mean, the best way to explain is like you have a SARC, I mean, SARC is supposed to be a group of, 6-7 countries, but it's always dominated by India and Pakistan. So, similarly in EU also, the dominant economies, which is France, Germany, Britain, they obviously call sorts. So, there are some countries who are not really doing that well. The Greece is one of the example. So, whenever there is a crisis, economic crisis in any of the EU countries, then the big brothers have to come and help them. So, yeah, to some extent the few of those big boys are driving the whole EU, but that's how it works.
But you see, Mr. Jha, one important thing is that what would it really mean? Because people have been trying to draw all kinds of larger, impact too. And the fact that it's not just limited to a country's economy and country's own decision, but it's also conveys a very larger message on how international cooperation, as I said, is going to be affected. Because these are the forums, these are the agreements which the countries have reached upon. Yeah,
you see, London is just not the capital of UK, it's an international financial center, as Dr. Pant rightly said. So, the whole world is watching today's referendum. We wouldn't have been discussing if it would not have been in London, in UK,
That's true.
So, it does have like more than 800 Indian companies have invested in UK. India is the third largest investor in UK. Some of the Indian companies are the biggest employer in the UK. So we also as a India, we also have a lot of stake at it. So imagine, at the moment you go and set up office in London and you are able to cover 28 countries out of that. But if Britain leaves EU, then you will have to go and open the office in France, in Germany, all of these separate countries. And then setting up your business or dealing, each boundary, each countries, is much more daunting than having at one window to do that, you know.
Yeah.
So it's a similar case with other countries.
And there are other countries, including, you know, the ones in the European Union, the Germany, for example, they had reached out to the Britain. I remember the weekend Der Spiegel edition where they had minimized the cost, ensured that it was published also in English, and reached out to the Britain, to the British, as Britons, in fact, as much as possible, so that they could be convinced about it. So what really happens afterwards is also something very important to look out for. Let's say if Britain moves out of the EU, what happens to the EU afterwards? And would there be further disintegration?
See, Britain, obviously, I mean, nobody knows how this today's, you know, referendum is going to pan out.
Right,
you know.
that's true.
But as indications are, it's like a very thin 51, 49%. And so I will not talk much about what happens to EU, what happens in UK. But as you see, Prime Minister will have to resign because this is his referendum, basically, you know, after general election, and he has promised that. So within the government, within the ruling party, there's going to be quite a big upheaval, you know. So it will be seen as his defeat. It's a Cameroon's referendum as well. So, you know, so it's going to be quite a political.
And conventionally, you know, what exactly do you think, you know, because every society has its own, there are certain things which define a particular society. So going by the conventional thought of how, you know, the society there would be, what do you think is going to be the larger thing on the minds of the voters? Is that going to be, as you said, the issues of sovereignty and having those concerns, whether it's to do with, you know, issues on courts ruling on human rights and other aspects, because that, I'm sure, Britishers would take it otherwise, even if we don't look at it that way. And of course, the concerns on economy.
You see, the certain section of the society, British society, I would call them, I mean, they're not really in majority, you know, but they do call sorts, you know, when it comes to the sovereignty, that, you know, why should we are a country of, you know, the great history, we are the country which when sun never sets, you know. So all these things they still have in the mind, you know, and they feel that why should we be bullied by these other countries in terms of our human rights record, you know. But you know, the larger population, my understanding is that will think that Britain has always led the world, you know, in terms of human rights, being part of the Security Council, being part of any other, you know, wherever there is a crisis in the world, you know, Britain has been at the forefront, you know,
I think that's a very important driver,
with Americans.
basically, you know.
So, you know, so they do realize that, look, we have a responsibility and global responsibility.
And according to you, can Britain take that blow, you know, the economic blow, if at all it chooses to move out?
As Dr. Pant rightly said, you know, I mean, it's going to be a very difficult, you know, economic decision if they do decide to get out of the EU, you know. Nobody knows. I mean, even the president, Americans have, you know, joined this bandwagon, you know.
That's right. Everybody, as I said, the whole world is watching it. Dr. Pant, in just 2 lines, you have to say it. But what exactly do you think will be the impact on the European Union?
I think European Union will stay where they are, because ultimately whether the European Union will weaken or disintegrate will depend largely how the Germany, France, and to a larger extent Holland is going to behave.
Okay.
As of now, whatever is available and whatever we hear from those economies, the chances are that they are not looking for moving away or disintegrating EU.
Fine. So as I said, there's nothing wrong in contemplating as to what really happens, but yes, of course, there has been a lot of rumbling going on within the British politics also for a very, very long time as to whether they should remain a part of the EU or not. And of course, much of it will come to rest by tomorrow Indian Standard Time, and we'll know as to what exactly the results will be. On that note, thank you very much, gentlemen. I have to thank you for joining me here.
Thank you.
That's all for now in this segment of Insight. Well, it's time for a very quick break now in Insight. After the break, we'll look at some other crucial decisions taken by the Union Cabinet yesterday. They are majorly seen as major reforms, major push to reforms. After the break. Welcome back. In Insight now, look at all those important decisions took by the Union Cabinet yesterday. Well, it decided on the spectrum sale and textile sectors, along with giving approval for a 10,000 crore corpus for startups in the country. Well, the push is aimed at improving customer services in the telecom sector, generate more revenues, create more jobs in the textile sector, give thrust to manufacturing and improve exports.
The government is giving a big push to major economic drivers. The Union Cabinet approved the largest auction of telecom spectrum, along with clearing a Rs 6,000 crore package to help the textile sector. With this, the government hopes to generate huge revenue, attract more investments, and create more jobs. The spectrum auction plan is expected to fetch the government Rs 5.44 lakh crore, which is more than double the gross revenue of the telecom industry in 2014-15. By giving a much needed boost to the textile sector, government hopes to see investment worth 11 billion in the sector, along with generating 50 billion in exports. The move is also expected to give a flip to the Make in India program and may lead to creation of 1 crore new jobs in the next 3 years. Apart from this, the cabinet has also approved Rs 10,000 crore fund of funds for startups to support them with the aim to generate employment for 18 lakh people. This is seen as a second wave of key reforms brought in by the government within days of announcing the new FDI norms. Bureau Report.
Should it thus be read as the big reform season? Well, to talk more on this, I'm joined by Mr. K.G. Narendranath, Executive Editor with the Financial Express, and also Mr. Shubhamoy Bhattacharjee, Consulting Editor with the Business Standard. Welcome to the program. Well, Mr. Narendranath, how do you look at these decisions? And as one would read it as the reform season, would you agree that it is indeed the reform season for our economy?
You know, recently there was FDI policy relaxations for various sectors.
Yeah.
Now, I wholeheartedly welcome this textile package.
That's right.
Even though I don't think this is adequate to, make the Indian industry competitive in the international markets. Actually, we lost our textile opportunity. This package is only some concessions in terms of tax. Whatever taxes they pay, they get the refund quickly. So, what we required in textile industry was there was a lot of legacy issues in the textile industry for decades. Our synthetic textile industry has not grown enough because of the very distorted duty structure. Huge protection was available to the primary manufacturers of polyester, filament yarn, PTA, on those kind of raw materials, which led to a situation that our textile industry is more cotton textile based. So, our exports are largely cotton textile based, where the international market, China and other countries, or if you see the international demand also, substantial demand is on the synthetic textile side.
Okay.
So, this was a great constraint, and there was also concessions and excise relief and other things given to small scale industries. It was reserved in the small scale industry. Weaving and processing segments were reserved for the small scale industry, like power looms, small weaving capacities.
Right.
Then we realized this around a decade ago. We started moving in the right direction, and we had a technology upgradation fund scheme for the textile industry. But this also has largely gone to the spinning industries, which are organized sector players. Actually, the new investments in textile industry should have come in the weaving and processing segment, where we are weak because of the traditional issues.
Right.
These were large. We need a large scale weaving and processing facilities, composite textile facilities, for achieving the economies of scale. So, this has not happened. Those issues have been partly addressed now, but still if you see the duty structure, you see still a lot of protection for the synthetic textile basic manufacturers even now. So, this needs to be corrected. The labor part of it, which has been done now, is a very good thing, because textile being a seasonal demand industry, you require more flexibility for the manufacturers to employ people, especially in the garment segment. So, to that extent, whatever is done now is good, but basic things are still need to be done. Actually, we lost our opportunity in acquiring the a larger share in the global textile market. Even smaller countries like Vietnam and Bangladesh have a larger share than India in the garments market. But we can now focus on the other aspects. Fabrics also a major export item. We have not been able to provide consistent quality fabric to the world markets like China has been doing. China is gradually, actually they have already moving out of this segment. So, early industrial time, you get these kind of industries, labor-intensive industries to flourish in the economy.
Right.
So we should have done it at least in the 80s or 90s. We should have been in a position to compete successfully with China in the world market and acquire a larger market share in the world market for textiles and garments.
Fine.
We could not do so. We are very late. Even now, we need more corrections to be done in the duty structure and other primary policy issues. The textile policy is now coming. I don't know, the implementation parties were quite in a haphazard way it's being implemented.
That's right.
So that is about the textiles. But
The textile part, let's just talk about the textiles in particular. The fact that, there's a lot of thrust on creating more jobs, and this happens to be one of the sectors that if the resources are put in this sector, it can create a good number of jobs, and that is one of the concerns of this government. The fact that the target is now to create 1 crore jobs in the next 3 years, are we really, hitting it in the right way, considering the fact that there is indeed a textile policy also, which has been talked about, and indeed the whole, the package that has been offered by, that has been approved now by the cabinet?
Yes, Shani, I mean, I quite like what Narendra said, that we should have done this thing much earlier. But at the same time, I also realized that we couldn't really have done earlier for the simple reason that very few government of India in the 80s, 90s had the fiscal space to be able to do these sort of stuff. And frankly speaking, we didn't, it was a different ball game, different world order altogether. Now, as you are talking about whether the employment would actually rise, I wouldn't put a number to it, but definitely the moment textile industry gets a boost, people get sucked into the jobs market. So that is very good. Textile is a very labor friendly sector, and definitely garmenting, it requires human intervention to create, even more than the first stage when you just create a yarn. Those can be largely mechanized. These ones cannot be mechanized, or they require a huge amount of human intervention. So to that extent, I would say yes, it is. Anything that you do would immediately push up the job quotient for the sector. Whether it's adequate, we'll have to figure out, because frankly, this is one sector where, despite the fact that we have been the early ones, India has always been a textile country through the ages, post-independence too, we have taken our eyes off it.
And have people moved out of this sector in these years?
Oh yes, you would notice that in traditional textile sector, traditional textile heavy states like Maharashtra, Mumbai basically region, and Gujarat, Ahmedabad, which used to be a huge textile centers, those centers have actually collapsed. So the the skill set that used to be there with the textile workers of generation ago, something like what used to be with railways in around West Bengal, has disappeared. So there is a need to retrain the workers, which is actually sad, but it needs to be done. But in terms of that other question that you're talking about, whether we have done adequate, I would say that if these are good steps, Narendra tracks this sector very well, so he would be able to say lots of other things about what are the more things that we need to do more enough. But I would say that those can be taken on as long as we accept that this is the first step, and then we need to take more, and we are not going wrong. Then I would say fine. This is a good.
And there is a direct connection with the Make in India program that has been pegged now, that this is going to certainly give a push to the Make in India. But what about the investments, the figures that have been quoted that the government is thinking to generate, to grab in the textile sector? At the same time, the export part, how do you look at those?
These figures being quoted now, 30 billion additional 3 years on dollar, very optimistic figures.
Yeah.
So we cannot suddenly change our export figures so drastically in such a short span of time. But now the Trans-Pacific Agreement, partnership agreement between the US and some larger number of countries, including Australia, Japan and all, they will have a regional kind of agreement where duty-free access will be allowed. Already Bangladesh, Vietnam, etc. are getting duty-free access to either EU or US markets. So we don't have those duty-free access now. We still face tariff barriers there. So immediately, overnight, we cannot change our, we cannot increase our exports to that extent. But with the help of all these structural reforms, the labor part of it is now addressed. They are getting more tax refunds easily. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
At the same time, as I mentioned earlier, the overall policy structure still needs to be revamped to make our weaving and processing segment more competitive and to have large composite manufacturing facilities. The TUFS has also been used largely by the spinning sector, which is for yarn exports.
Okay.
But we have to export made-ups, fabrics, garments. These areas we have to be more competitive, especially on the synthetic part of that.
Yeah.
So this can happen with this, although we are late now, we can still try to capture a
And
larger segment of the market.
do we have enough resources in terms of manpower, the
manpower,
skill that is required?
Labor, we are competitive.
We are competitive in the
terms
labor
of
part,
labor.
okay.
We have logistics issues. The overall cost
that is one
structure,
issue,
if you see the overall cost structure, we are not that competitive. But labor, if you take a part, we are competitive there. But we need a large spinless, the shuttleless looms, which is in the weaving segment, large capacities for shuttleless looms. I mean, single segment, single unit will have a large capacity, so that we have.
Is it easy to put it in percentage as to how much are we able to export to other countries?
No, our export share is just around 3% now. Even our share in the global market is quite not that good in terms if you take that. So actually, we have to increase our export substantially. After China, we are the most competitive country in the world, which can actually capture the world textile market.
Yeah.
We have been late, and now if we try with all those reforms, at least we may not get what we could have got earlier otherwise, but we will at least get something more. And it will also lead to large employment. That's a very important thing, especially for women, because this is garmenting. Large number of women are employed in the garment sector. So this is good for the general economic well-being of the people, rather than giving us a push to the economy for the distribution of wealth also. This is an important sector, and government has rightly identified that. But what we should have done these things much earlier.
And the fact that the 10,000 crore corpus for the startup mission, the fact that it was indeed a part of the government's announcement too. How do you look at the whole push given to generation of employment, skill development, entrepreneurship, whatnot? How do you look at that?
Yeah, the startup mission, this money part leaves me a bit worried, for the simple reason that no government, no matter how well intentioned, and has a problem in terms of giving out money. Even venture capitalists, when they see a entrepreneur coming up to their door, they use their gut instinct to read up the proposal the person has made and then give out the money. But out of every 10 proposals, 8 fail. In fact, some cases even 9. Now, for the government to take that sort of government managers to take that sort of risk, that I am ready, and on my files 9 proposals would fail and there will be no questions asked.
Yeah.
I mean, I would like to know that whether the CAGs and the CVCs of the world, and they would also have their own reason, whether they think that a particular whether a particular proposal has been.
That's a very important aspect to look at. Mr. Narendranath, how do you look at the startup mission as such, and the money that the government is now putting in the completion of it?
These are very long-term programs. If you see these funds which are
again
going to be
figures
created,
quoted here, 18 lakh
it's over the
employment
period of both the
opportunities
14th
or
and
jobs.
the 15th Finance Commission period. We are trying to develop this kind of fund and all. We have a 10,000. They are committed 10,000 for the government side. What they provide is 500 crore or 600 crore now. And then we are trying to use the another 60,000 crore from other sources, and then use create the leverage it to create debt, adequate debt also.
Yeah.
But it's also other segment. It's also important that the higher education sector also given a substantial push, and the linkage between the academia and the skill, this startup sector should be established more, in a more strong way. So already there is some initiative in this direction. Some IIT Madras and some other institutions have already started having startup centers in their institutes. So this is more important. The Skill India scheme and all these put together can, over a period of time, from a decade from now or 2 decades from now, there can be substantial improvement. But we should see this as a long-term goals rather than immediate.
And one major, in fact, announcement was around the spectrum sale, and the fact that much is expected of it if at all the sales happen the way government wants. A good amount of revenue is going to be generated, almost double to what was seen last year. But is that really going to happen? Do you see enough takers for that?
Well, takers is a big issue, because when we look at I mean, yesterday's cabinet decision is simply one end of the process. The TRAI had approved it, it had gone to the Telecom Commission from there the cabinet has basically endorsed and put it on file that yes, go ahead with the spectrum auction, which obviously the cabinet has to approve before the ball can be laid out. So yes, it's approval, and it means that the auctions are definitely on. The timing and other details would obviously be worked out by the ministry going down the line. About whether the amount of money, 5,44,000 crore, can be raised from the telecom sector, and with the current auctions, frankly, every time we have played Cassandras, and the telecom companies have actually rather gone ahead and have laid out the money. So the government would think that that's the same thing would happen this time again. But I'm a bit skeptical, because frankly speaking, now we are distinctly seeing two phenomena. First of all, there's a consolidation clearly happening in the telecom sector. It has happened quite distinctly. Lots of companies have given up, those who really weren't there. So it has become more of a tight knit sector. Secondly, this means that the telecom companies which are there can now be more comfortable about knowing how much airwaves they need to buy.
Okay.
The competition, what will it offer? Where do they stand? So the men versus the boys, the distinction has been made clear. So the earlier rush, for everybody, because if I don't take it, somebody else will go on, that's gone. The other part is that the telecom sector definitely is now realizing that India's first flush of the voice telephony is over. In the data market, the expansion will be at different levels. There will be an expansion at the mobile level, in the sense that the data market, but at the same time, a lot of it also depends on what happens in the internet penetration. And that market, the comparative choice of consumers vis-a-vis using laptop, PC that is, versus whether using their business on smartphone.
Okay. Right.
So, distinctions and differences would be now much more clear in terms of who needs to put in what amount of money. So yes, there will be demand, but it'll be a very the people will be taking much more hard decisions, and particularly the reserve prices that have been set are frankly, I would think, rather too ambitious.
But your newspaper, in fact, today writes about three telecom companies, the fact that Idea, Vodafone and Airtel may not be really interested to bid for the 700 megahertz band. So is that a possibility? Because,
because that's exactly what I was saying, that the ecosystem that has now been created doesn't force, if you look at some of the several auctions earlier, like when the 1800 was largely put on the block. Now you needed to buy it because there was the license fee regime. The period was coming over. People needed that band to ensure that they could migrate. There were a lot of I had to do, and I can't afford not to be in their line. Now that position is not there. With the consolidation clearly happening, 700 megahertz is a new ecosystem. Machines are coming up. The simple way of putting it is how many mobiles are right now available which can take on a 700 megahertz band propagation broadcasting characteristic. Not many. So it is a look into the future. You are building up a new set of ability without being very sure that whether I have already exhausted at the other end the 2100 megahertz capacity. So essentially, therefore, companies, before doing that, they would like to look at whether I have actually used up all my capacity and used my airwaves adequately enough, whether consolidation
so that
there
I can jump into some
wouldn't
levels.
really make me much more useful.
Okay.
The other thing is, of course, the fact that these companies have all promised to do a substantial amount of investment in towers. Now
and that's something one would have to certainly look at. But was it something which was very much needed? At least, we all grapple with a lot of problems, including that of call drops. So, how to connect it with that?
The consumer interest, that's how consumers are satisfied. You don't need any study to prove that the telecom quality, if in terms of speed of the internet or the call drops, it is very bad. They are not meeting the benchmarks. It is very clear. So now also after the auction also people are saying now they are more looking at coverage rather than capacity. So coverage they are focusing, but if you see unless you increase capacity also and make the services more interesting or attractive to the consumers, your ability to expand also will get a bit constrained.
And telecom, firms have their own say. They always talk about the huge debts they grapple with and some other, concerns that they had. In fact, they had a lot of issues vis-a-vis TRAI as well in the past. But, how do you look at all those, issues which have to be resolved now? After all, this is one of those sectors where you would like to see a lot of growth.
For their expansion, the rural sector, if you see the market growth, is much higher. So already around 46 crore internet penetration is there in the country. And the growth in the overall growth of the 30%. If you see the mobile internet growth, it is even higher, much higher than that.
Yeah.
So and now it is growing exponentially. Actually, the demand from the rural side is now substantial. Exponential growth we are seeing in the rural segment. So in order to expand the market, they should actually focus on the rural segment now, because the rural segment provides a lot of opportunity for the telecom companies to expand. There is still a lot of space in the country for the telecom companies to expand their network. So as Sumo rightly mentioned, I don't think this they will be able to the government will be able to generate the revenue which they are now expecting.
Yeah.
Actually, they have in the budget also they have provided some 1 lakh crore from communication services, which basically they are looking at this segment only.
Fine.
So I don't think that is possible, because already because of the indebtedness of the companies, most of the companies are not in a position to spend that much for additional spectrum. They may get spectrum for whatever, especially the above 1 gigahertz area, people may be interested. But this new 700 megahertz, I am doubtful how many companies will be interested in acquiring
Fine.
that.
So these are all ambitious targets, but one would have to see as to how the results would be. On that note, I'll have to thank you, gentlemen, for joining me in Insight. Well, that's all for today in Insight. Thanks very much for watching. Goodbye.